Good afternoon, and thanks again for joining our session today, and thanks to the education team for inviting us to present. As Victoria said, my name is Stacy Grolnic. I'm the Program Director for the Oncology Clinical Research Support Team, or OCRST, and I will be moderating today's session along with the help of the education team. So we have an excellent panel for today's session. Dr. Breelyn Wilky is a medical oncologist specializing in sarcoma. She serves as the Deputy AD of Clinical Research and serves as the chair for our IIT Review Committee. She's an active translational researcher and is serving as a PI on multiple clinical trials, including an investigator-initiated trial. Denise Castillo has 11 years of experience in clinical research finances, both in the private and public sector, and is currently our OCRST finance manager. Tessa McSpadden is our clinical project manager and has worked in oncology research for almost 15 years, the majority of that here with the CU Cancer Center, leading clinical research teams. Stephanie Hill is the monitoring program manager for OCRST and has over 10 years experience leading clinical research teams in hepatology, gastroenterology, and oncology. And Tiffany Cull is our regulatory affairs manager for the OCRST IIT team. She has over 12 years of experience with regulatory compliance, including working within an IRB, with clinical trial monitoring, and now, of course, regulatory within the IIT program. Full bios for all of our panelists are available on the link that is in the chat. But before turning over to our panelists, I'd like to just take a few moments to provide an overview of the investigator-initiated trial support that's offered within the Oncology Clinical Research Support Team, or OCRST. Next slide. And you can jump ahead, Victoria. Investigator-initiated trials, or IITs, are really an important part of our CU Cancer Center clinical trial research portfolio. As an NCI-designated comprehensive cancer center, really a lot of these are high-priority studies are given to IITs, and particularly those that have a translational or team science research approach. IITs were noted as a strategic priority for our center, and these studies often can include exploratory or correlative studies that are important in identifying signals for targeted therapies, as well as identification of biomarkers that may serve as predictors for response. So these studies can also have the advantage of having the ability to be targeted more closely to cancer types or questions that are of importance to our catchment area, and for our cancer center, that's the entire state of Colorado. These kind of catchment area specific topics or concerns may not be pursued by pharmaceutical company sponsors, but can more easily be done in an IIT setting. Next slide. The OCRST IIT team was developed in 2015 to provide the expertise that's needed to support the development and conduct of these important and unique trials. So investigators can present concepts at our IIT incubator meeting, and they can get input from bench and clinical scientists, as well as our biostatisticians, to really help to further refine their hypothesis and study design. The IIT Review Committee prioritizes translational and team science projects, as I mentioned, as well as those that are developed by our junior faculty. And if approved by the IIT Review Committee, the OCRST IIT support team then surrounds the PI and the study team to provide project management, regulatory, clinical data monitoring, as well as financial support. We guide the investigator through the process of protocol development, regulatory submissions, all the logistics of protocol startup, clinical data monitoring, including database management. And the OCRST support then continues throughout the life cycle of the study, through the active study phase, through any follow-up period, and then finally through IRB closeout. Next slide. And the IIT Incubator and IIT Review Committee meetings are held every other month on an alternating schedule. So the incubator is intended to provide really a forum for investigators seeking peer feedback, but also provides an opportunity to connect with other researchers or collaborate with other clinical and basic scientists in the development of a project. The IIT Review Committee reviews projects for alignment with Cancer Center priorities, assesses feasibility of completion of the study as it's designed, and approves OCRST IIT team resources to support the study. We have a lot more information available about our IIT support that's provided by OCRST, as well as information on submitting to the incubator or the IIT review committee on our clinical research intranet site. And I'll post that link in the chat here in a second. And I will help to moderate questions at the end of the session, but I will like to now turn the presentation over to our panelists. And our first up is Dr. Wilky, who will be presenting from her perspective as a PI on an IIT.
Hi, everybody. I'm Bree Wilky, for those of you that I haven't met before. And I'm a medical oncologist that focuses on a rare type of cancer called sarcomas, which are bone and soft tissue tumors. And then I run clinical trials. I do a little bit of lab work, and then obviously see patients. So, one of the things that became clear to me pretty early when I was a very young fellow in my training for oncology was how important clinical trials were, simply to provide hope for patients, because for most patients with cancer, the treatments that we have are really not great. And I remember being a brand new fellow, seeing a pancreatic cancer patient for the first time and going, well, we'll just give them, gemcitabine or whatever. And I remember my attending looking at me and going, we have to get them on a trial, because we're never going to fix this patient. We're never going to cure this patient with the treatments that we have today. And that's sort of what got me into clinical trials to begin with, is just this desire to try to give patients hope and to really be part of that cutting edge where new treatments are being developed that may change how we treat cancer and give us new options in the future. So rare diseases, I think, are even more challenging, right? So, clinical trials are typically sponsored and paid for by pharmaceutical companies. And a pharmaceutical company, unfortunately, nothing against this, they have their priorities. And oftentimes, those priorities come from financial considerations. So what is likely to be applicable to a large number of patients, where they can recoup the sizable cost that it takes to get a drug into the clinic. And then also, just considerations like they may have evidence that their treatment works much better in lung cancer or breast cancer, but really sarcomas are about 100 different diseases. So the chance of a company with a really cool new drug wanting to develop it in sarcoma is pretty low. And so I think that's where IITs come in. Like I know what my patients need, and I know ideas that I might have based on things I've learned from other types of cancer. But an IIT allows you to present a promising concept or a good idea for a treatment that might help a certain patient population that might not be within the lines or the priorities of the pharmaceutical companies. And so the problem, of course, is selling that and getting the resources that you need to conduct that trial. But that's where these new ideas can really come to light. And so IITs, I think, are some of the most exciting trials, because they're coming out of either bench to bedside type of research from docs in our labs that are doing these really cool experiments and saying, hey, when I look in test tubes or petri dishes or mice that have a certain type of cancer, and I mix these two drugs together, I'm seeing really good responses. Let's try this in patients. Or, I might be working on phase 1 where I'm doing these all-comer studies, and, I see, gosh, I put this random patient with sarcoma on an all-comer phase 1 trial, and gosh, their tumor shrunk by 50%. Why don't we expand this? Why don't we look at other patients in sarcomas because of these patients that I've seen? And these can all transition into an IIT. It's not always that easy. So, unfortunately, a lot of what we have to do is, an investigator might have a really good idea, but if they don't have a partner or they don't have a way to get that drug into a clinical trial, meaning financially, it can be very expensive to run even a straightforward study that seems, very, very easy and logistically feasible. So even something like a survey or providing a non-intervention or non-drug still requires research assessments, and requires IRB fees, and it requires, funding and support to be able to do that. So our job here in OCRST is really to provide that support and help get these ideas off the ground. And, yes, our investigators do a lot of work, and I do a lot of work meeting with pharma companies to try to convince them to collaborate with me and do IITs. And that's definitely a super important part of what clinical researchers do as investigators. But our goal here is to, to use the resources we have, our partnerships with philanthropy, the funding and support that we get from the Cancer Center, to specifically for these types of trials, to get that to the investigators so that these ideas can become a reality. And so, my first IIT really was a patient walking in my clinic and saying, I have an incurable disease, and his family looking at me saying, we have to do something. And at the time, there was only one trial for that disease anywhere in the country. And we went with it. And by some amazing coincidence and probably a lot of luck, we were able to get Merck to sponsor my first IIT for a very, very rare group of sarcomas. And that actually turned out to become a very promising therapy that is now wound up in the guidelines. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But I had to negotiate with 2 pharma companies to get them to work together to do this trial. And that was really not easy. And I think, having experienced people to look at your protocols, to help you walk through FDA requirements, to spot potential pitfalls before they happen, having run my second IIT in Colorado here, the support from OCRST makes a huge, huge difference. And it goes all through the life cycle of the study, really from design all the way to the analysis phase. So I hope that's a little bit of a background from the investigator perspective. And now we'll hear a little bit more about like the specific supports that OCRST does provide. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Denise Castillo, and I am the finance manager for the OCRST team. As you can see, we're a small team consisting of myself and our newly added finance professional, Mariah Roberts. As the finance team for IITs, we're usually the first contact a PI will have with OCRST, since many of the services we provide actually occur before a PI presents their study to the IIT. Next slide, please. Our finance team provides a full array of services to PIs. We certainly understand that financials for clinical trials can be very complex, particularly for IITs, and that trying to navigate all the moving pieces can be intimidating. That's why our team is here with you from study startup to study closeout. We work closely with PIs to develop budgets for their concepts so that they're aware of how much funding they should actually be seeking. So it's usually a good idea to reach out to us before requesting any funding from pharma or for applying for any grants. We also manage the financials during the entire life of the study, which includes invoicing sponsors, working with the CCTO to get hospital bills and labor charges paid, and ensuring that all charges are correct. We make sure to keep a close eye on your funding as the study progresses to ensure that we are still on track and have enough funding to complete the study. Our team also assists with contracts for clinical research trials. If the PI is collaborating with a pharmaceutical company, another institution, an external lab or vendor, then a clinical trial agreement or other contract will be needed. Again, this can be very confusing to navigate, so we're here to guide you through it all. First agreement that you should be looking at to put in place is a confidentiality agreement or a CDA. CDAs are designed to protect your confidential information that may be shared, particularly when you're working with an industry sponsor. So these are really designed to protect the PI, to protect the study concept and idea, and should ideally be executed prior to any sharing of information, including your study protocol. CDAs are often executed before a PI even comes to the IIT committee, so please don't hesitate to reach out to me directly to get these routed to the legal team for execution. Once you have a CDA in place and your study has been approved for funding by industry, then a clinical trial agreement or CTA will be required. This is also needed if the company is only providing drug, but no funding. Additionally, if the PI is planning a multi-institutional study, then a subcontract for participating site may be needed. This includes any academic institutions, as well as UC Health North and South. Additional agreements, such as material transfer agreements, data transfer agreements, vendor agreements, all of these may be needed just depending on the type of study you're running. So the OCRST finance team will assist in identifying any necessary agreements and will help work with you getting this executed. Next slide, please. Our finance team can provide these services to PIs even outside of OCRST. So even if the PI does not present to the IIT committee, the OCRST finance team can still provide budget development for grants and other funding submissions, as well as contracting assistance at no charge. We can also help guide you to the appropriate route for your IIT, answering any questions concerning whether your study should come through the IIT committee or go a different route. Our team has collaborated with other departments such as CREST, Children's Hospital, the VA, and the Cancer Center Administration team to get IITs funded and open. So we're always willing to assist a PI outside of OCRST. My contact information is at the bottom of the slide, so please don't hesitate to reach out to us for any budgeting or contracting questions you may have. Thank you so much.
So hello, my name is Tessa McSpadden, and I'm going to present on our project management and database management for our IITs. So our team consists of myself as project manager, and then we have 3 project coordinators, Anne, Kat, and Ashley. And then we also have our data specialist, Lauren. Next slide, please. So during the IIT startup phase, our project coordinators generally assist with any of the protocol development, which usually takes us about 3 rounds of review. We set up a protocol planning meeting with kind of any of the parties that will be involved in the study. We would send out feasibility questionnaires for any of our multi-site studies. We would assist with the PRMS and HSR portal submissions. We do any study toolkit development, which also includes any of our specimen collection components, so the forms, kits, to be able to provide those to the clinical team. During the startup, we also send out our bi-weekly update emails to keep everyone in the loop of any of the kind of study status. And then once we get close to having kind of all the necessary approvals in the contract, we go ahead and work with the clinical team to schedule the SIVs. Our data specialist during startup would go ahead and work to do the database development, so getting feedback from our PI, our project coordinators, our monitors, and our clinical team. And once those forms in the database are all complete, we go ahead and put together a completion guideline and training slides for the clinical team to be able to reference. We also coordinate a training after the first patient's enrolled for the database components. Next slide. During the IIT maintenance, our product coordinators will assist with any of our protocol amendments as required. So working with monitors, regulatory, and the clinical teams to kind of finalize those amendments. We do any patient registrations or randomizations for our multi-site studies or studies that have dose escalations. And then for multi-site studies, we would also help with quarterly and progress reports for DSMC. For multi-site studies as well, we do coordinate study teleconferences to be able to discuss any study, patient, and safety updates. And then for studies that apply, we would do any interim analysis coordination. So for any of our dose escalation or studies that may have futility analysis. And then during the study, any study questions that might come up from the clinical team about the protocol, we would always be available to answer questions. And then our data specialists during the maintenance phase would do any required database updates just based on amendments or monitoring visits or just kind of needs based on the team's option lists and such. Then also do quarterly QA of kind of dates within Encore and our database to make sure that everything's aligning. And then doing interim data pulls for publications and or interim safety analysis. Next slide. During closeout, our project coordinators assist with the lab closeout pieces, so mainly related to any of the specimen analysis or long-term banking. We also assist with the results reporting requirements, so varies, but usually kind of our funding sponsors, IIT committee, our Cancer League of Colorado, if they provided funding, if ct.gov results are required, etc. We also work with our monitors to make sure that the database is clean and locked. And then the data specialist would work with the PI and stats during kind of the analysis portion to answer any questions or clarifications on kind of where to find the data that they need. Next slide. So project and data management services on our IITs that might be a little different from our industry sponsored trials. So on our IITs, we essentially serve as a sort of internal CRO for the studies. And so we assist PI with protocol and database development by providing our expertise from kind of our experience on previous IITs. We work with any vendors that are required for studies, whether that be labs, CROs, et cetera, for any of the trial coordination pieces. We manage feasibility pieces for any of our multi-site trials. We also do the dose escalation coordination, as well as provide any data for review for the interim safety analysis or futility analysis, and provide required study updates to funding sponsors per the contract. So usually at a quarterly or monthly frequency or as defined. Next slide. And just to give kind of a schematic of the overview of our flow. So PI usually provides us with a draft protocol, and we work with them to finalize that protocol and schedule a protocol planning meeting to kind of outline any of the logistics for the study, and develop processes, forms, database, all kind of following all of that finalization. And work with our regulatory team to submit all of the necessary submissions for approvals. And once we have those approvals, activate the study at each of the participating sites. And then once the studies are open, we monitor enrollment, provide study updates, answer any protocol questions, work with our monitors and regulatory team on any of the data and safety components for the trial. And then once the trial concludes, we really work with the PI through any of the closeout pieces and analysis and publication for their trial. And that is all for me.
Thanks, Tessa. Hi, I'm Stephanie Hill. I'm the OCRST monitor manager. And if you guys were a part or attended the monitoring panel last month, this will kind of be a short and condensed overview from that. So currently we have a monitoring team of 6, and we have a really great vast range of experience on our team, and it helps in monitoring, and everybody brings great wisdom to our visits. So next slide. Our OCRST monitoring team acts as a central piece to the successful conduct of IITs. The monitoring process encourages real-time adjustments to study operations, and it also affords researchers an effective approach to demonstrate proper delegation of research duties in real time in order to maintain accountability and oversight while ensuring the scientific integrity of the research data. Next slide. Some of the services that OCRST monitors provide, of course, like Tessa mentioned before, we help out with protocol reviews, we review database builds and provide feedback. We participate in the site initiation visits. We do interim risk-based monitoring. We do study closeouts. And of course, we develop clinical monitoring plans. Our monitoring of IITs is described in further detail in the clinical monitoring plan that we create specifically for each clinical trial. So no 2 monitoring plans are ever the same. Next slide. How we are different from sponsor monitoring. Our team is involved with the protocol and the study from the very beginning. We help out with protocol reviews, providing feedback before the study goes to the IRB. We work with project coordinators, regulatory, PIs, and study teams to build a database to reflect endpoints and risk-based monitoring practices. We develop our CMP to reflect those risk-based monitoring practices, and as stated before, it's specialized to each study. Also, OCRST monitors are a part of the university, so it allows us to be more flexible with teams and PIs regarding schedules and monitoring visits as well as deadlines. And as a result of our flexibility, the study teams are often able to work to resolve many of our findings during our visit, which makes our lives and the study team's lives and the PI's lives much easier. And so we enjoy working with everyone at the Cancer Center, and we look forward to continuing to work with the study teams in the future. I think that's it.
Awesome. Thank you, Stephanie. My name is Tiffany Cull. I'm the Regulatory Affairs Project Manager for the OCRST Regulatory Affairs team. We are a team of 5, and we, unlike the CCTO, do not divide between startup, maintenance, or closeout. So all your regulatory contact will be with you from the inception of the study all the way till closeout. Next slide, please. So OCRST regulatory, most PIs and study teams are aware that there are regulatory requirements and submissions that need to be made both during startup and throughout the life of the study. The difference the difference is with an IIT that the PI also takes on the role of sponsor. They may not be providing the funding, i.e. a funding sponsor, but in the eyes of the FDA, the PI is now the sponsor. So what we try to do is help the PI navigate through those additional requirements of being a sponsor in addition to an investigator. So during startup, we will, again, review the protocol with the rest of the team. And one of the major differences is that we will prepare your consent form and your FDA documentation to be submitted. We will walk you through the 30-day period, whether or not you've submitted for an IND exemption or whether you are expecting to hold a full IND, just so that we can take care of all the administrative portions of the submissions while the PI is free to just comment on the science and the medicine of the protocol during the FDA review. We also maintain the FDA communications through the life of the study. So there are annual progress reports that are required, as well as issuing any IND safety reports to the FDA. As a regulatory team, we will also perform all other regulatory functions. So that includes your IRB submissions and communications, amendments, PRMS and IRB submission, your safety reporting. And then another thing that is a sponsor requirement is the requirement to hold all essential documents for the entire trial, i.e. a TMF, a trial master file. So in addition to the requirements that a site needs to follow for appropriate regulatory documentation, we also assist in maintaining all the documentation that you would need to fulfill your sponsor responsibilities. So next slide, please. So the difference, again, like I mentioned, versus the IIT, versus the industry protocols, is that these are a higher risk to the institution because the PI is an individual that holds the IND, and that's not the university. So we work with the OCRST team, project managers, monitors, and finance to make sure that all the applicable regulations and institutional policies are being followed. Again, we guide the FDA through the submission process and the FDA requirements through the life of the study and maintain the eTMF in our new eReg software, which will be launching Q1 next year. Next slide, please. Oh, and that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Great. So I will bring it back around and just say a few more words about the IIT committee, and then just, tell a few more examples about how transformative that these studies can be and how much we appreciate the infrastructure that we have here at University of Colorado to make this happen. So the IIT committee is a big group of people that actually all come together. And the goal is that we want investigators very early on to have input from a variety of people coming at clinical trials from different perspectives. And the whole reason for this is we want to have successful IITs. As you've heard, this takes a tremendous amount of resources to support these studies. And these are really important for investigator careers, for patients, and for the university. So we want to see success there. What does success really mean? Well, it transfers to high accruals for one thing. So I think the nightmare study that we all stress over is the study that has a fantastic idea, a great investigator, and then we're a year and a half into the study and we've only put 2 patients on, and, trying to understand like what are those obstacles. And so, when an investigator presents the trial, one of the key things that we as a group will provide feedback on is, any potential barriers to accrual. Are you trying to recruit a really, really rare population with only one center? is the study schedule that you've laid out with going to be very, very difficult to stay compliant with, meaning you're going to deviate from your protocol, or patients are going to come off study because they just can't keep up with all of the demands. These are pretty straightforward things that we can correct early on with good sets of eyes that can spot potential problems. We also recognize that these are really expensive to do. And so trying to prioritize the funding dollars that we have and make the connections, with our philanthropists to try to get additional dollars to help those studies get off the ground. Looking at budgets and making sure that, do you really need to have labs and a visit with a provider every week on your trial, or can we maybe pull that back a little bit just to sort of save budgetary input? Do you need an EKG every single time, or is there enough safety data that we don't have to like bill in EKGs every time? So little logistical things can really make studies go much smoother. The other common scenario that we get with the committee is a very ambitious protocol. And as you've heard, we can reliably monitor and coordinate 3 sites only. But again, for these super rare subtypes, it may be a better option to go through a cooperative group, which can allow participation of more centers to more quickly complete the objectives of the study. And we have connections and experience with some of the main groups that are designed to run IITs that are a little bit bigger than the scope of what we can support. And, that can sometimes be frustrating because we want to keep it all here. We want to be able to run everything locally, but sometimes for the betterment of the study, you're better off looking at some of these other groups that can provide more support. So the whole reason we have investigators present very, very early is so that we can identify these potential pitfalls, put in the strategies and the recommendations, and help hit the ground running as best we can. So as you've heard, these are really high risk, but really high reward studies. One of the best examples for how incredibly awesome and important these studies can be is cellular therapies. And I know there's some people from our cellular therapy group on the call, but these are cellular therapies include CAR T cell protocols, engineered or tumor infiltrating lymphocyte protocols. And these are really customized precision treatments for patients where you're collecting their own immune cells and then potentially engineering them to be better immune cells with genetically engineered constructs that go into these cells to be given back to fight the cancer. And so we have folks on campus who have developed this technology, these specific constructs in the laboratory. And so with the partnership of the Gates Biomanufacturing Facility and the Gates Institute, we are actively running first in human trials of brand new science coming out of our laboratories that's only available here in Colorado. But cellular therapies is even more of a high risk from a regulatory standpoint and patient safety, because they can be very toxic therapies. And then whenever you're dealing with a product that is on campus and that we are truly holding the IND for a product that we're responsible for, it adds a tremendous degree of complexity. And so we're just beginning to dabble in these sorts of things that are going to become more and more common as cellular therapy takes off. And it's incredibly exciting. And sort of, what I think is one of the most challenging IITs that can be run here on campus. Certainly, these studies can transform investigator careers. So as I mentioned, my first IIT was a patient who came in with a 1 in a million cancer, something called alveolar soft part sarcoma. And at the time that I met this patient, and this was in Miami, there was only one trial going on at the NCI for this disease. And once we were able to get our study approved, this was only at Miami, and it was for ASPS, but also other types of sarcomas, combining pembrolizumab, which you guys have probably all heard of. This is a checkpoint inhibitor that's now approved for many types of cancer. But at the time, I was 2 years in, and I had never done any immunotherapy work before at all. And so what we saw is that, patients were traveling all over the country and internationally to go to Miami, particularly with ASPS, to participate in this trial. And then we saw that more than half the patients were getting benefit, significant benefit, and even cures in a couple of patients. And so what happened from that study was that combination of treatments wound up going into the NCCN guidelines. And I had patients with ASPS all over the country who were being treated, covered by insurance because of that trial that we completed showing the activity. And, that trial was the first time that we had reported that immunotherapy could be helpful for that cancer group. And then led to more than 200 patients across the world with a very, very rare disease now getting checkpoint inhibitors in various forms. And just last year, atezolizumab was approved for ASPS, the first approval of a drug for that disease ever in the FDA. So, this is one example, and obviously biased, but, part of it was I now shifted my focus entirely to immunotherapy and came to Colorado and had never thought I would wind up in the situation that I'm at because of that trial. But then also, we created options for patients because of a very small study that just had a lot of impact. And that is not the only success story that's out there. There are investigators here at Colorado that conducted smaller IITs that then led to industry-sponsored bigger phase 3 studies. So they took it on to do international studies for concepts that were developed in an IIT. Elaine Lamb in GU has a study that has done that. And then Martin McCarter also had a study that wound up becoming a Merck study, a bigger study that was randomized. So basically, we want to see people succeed. We want to see these trials actually make impact for our patients, but we can't do it alone. And it takes a village. And I think it's just really unique what we have here. Having been in Miami, again, a great institution, and other centers out there, having this support, having the investment from the Cancer Center in a group like this with such skills and such experience is really invaluable and transformative to folks who are trying to do investigator-initiated studies. So that's about all I have to say. Again, we're here to help for any of the investigators that are on the call. Don't be shy with presenting your concepts early. We can try to make it happen and help you get in touch with the people that you need to make it happen. So with that, I will turn it back over to Stacy, and I think it's question time.
Yes, thank you to all of our presenters. Great information that was provided today. I appreciate all of you are taking the time to be part of this panel. If you have questions from attendees, go ahead and post them in the chat. We will get to as many as we can with the time we have left. We should be able to get through a good deal of questions. We're also going to go through some of the questions that were presented or sent ahead of the meeting today. Before I get to questions, though, I would like to just mention, I see Kara Grau is on our call today. Kara is another member of our team and does provide another layer of support, which is around clinicaltrials.gov registration for all of our OCRST IITs. So Kara is just another component of our research support for these important trials. And you can see our general email is on the slide in front of you, our cpdm.iit. Please feel free to use that for any questions that you have even after today's call. So we're going to start with, I see one of the questions in the chat was from Nicole, and it was regarding how our team is funded and supported. And that's a great question. We get that a lot, as well as how we build our costs into budgets. So you are correct, Nicole. We have very generous institutional support to support our IIT support team. This, as I mentioned in the overview, IITs are really highly valued in the oncology setting, and we have been very, very lucky to have great support financially from our Cancer Center leadership. We are also set up so that we are not expected to be a revenue sort of neutral or revenue generating group. So that obviously is we provide a lot of value, but we also are an expensive group to fund, and our Cancer Center has chosen to do that. We do have, separately than supporting our staff through institutional funds, we do try to recoup some of that expense through a fee schedule, which we have posted on our internet site. We try to price our services so that we're not sort of gouging our investigators by any means, but trying to recoup some of that cost that the Cancer Center is putting forward to support our staff. So we do charge for things like project coordination, IND submission, monitoring services, those kinds of things, as well as some of the sort of more routine, if you will, sort of startup costs that you're used to seeing in industry-funded trials. But our costs are benchmarked well below what you would charge an industry sponsor. We do have our services are open to any cancer center member, and particularly for interventional studies. So, we are available for a broad swath of our investigators working in the oncology space. And so I'll move over to some of the questions that were provided ahead of the meeting. First up, maybe I'll direct this to Tessa and Stephanie. Can you discuss your process for risk assessment and mitigation when an investigator is also acting as a sponsor? I know, Stephanie, you mentioned risk-based monitoring, but I know you and Tessa and others have been involved in a risk assessment model for our team as well.
Yeah, I can go ahead and go first, and then Tessa, if you want to jump in whenever. So the FDA states that sponsors of clinical trials are required to provide oversight and ensure proper monitoring and risk mitigation. So we kind of do this in two steps. So we first start at an OCRST overhead team level, and we complete a risk assessment that includes project coordinators looking at it and regulatory looking at it, as well as monitors. And we kind of decide then, after we go through, we've set up some questions to kind of determine the risk, like, is there an IND, things like that. So we'll determine at an overhead team level whether it's high, medium, and low. And then monitors come in and complete their own risk assessment, and that kind of mirrors the overhead. It's a twofold. That mirrors the overhead risk assessment that was done, and that helps us develop our clinical monitoring plan, and that determines like how often monitoring visits will happen, what data is going to be reviewed, and things like that. The biggest point of this, though, is that the risk assessment of the study is continuous, and it changes throughout the life cycle of the study. And this is both at the overhead level and at the monitoring level. So more so like on the monitoring level, that means like if there's like multiple SAEs, if there's a lot of data errors, if there's things like that, we'll kind of up the risk and kind of go more often and widen our view and look at more things while we're monitoring. But if all subjects are in follow-up, if it's slow enrolling, if the data is crystal clear, then we'll lower our risk and kind of complete our monitoring visits less. So Tessa, did you want to add anything that I forgot?
I don't have too much. I think to your point, yeah, the risk assessment tool that we've created really kind of is split up into sections so that we can, identify areas where there might be high risk and really kind of customize it to a particular study and define kind of what risks we may expect, and then also kind of how we're going to handle those risks if they do come up, and any actions that might be needed. And then I think we're just basically checking in on those at a certain frequency. So whether that be via monitoring visits, via teleconferences, etc., we're kind of continuing to just check in and make sure that we're following that assessment as planned. So
thank you both. The next question I'll direct to Denise, and if the person that submitted this, if I'm not answering it properly or interpreting it properly, please jump in. So the question is, how are other departments handling IITs that are hybrid collaboration agreements? I'm taking this to mean more of sort of maybe multi-institutional or a study that crosses multiple departments from an agreement standpoint, but we can also speak to that, maybe Tessa, from a coordination standpoint. But Denise, I'll turf that to you to start.
Sure, yeah, and again, I'm not quite sure what they mean by the hybrid collaboration agreements, but certainly, if it's an agreement that's maybe outside of OCRST, it didn't come through the IIT committee, maybe it's a collaboration between a CREST study, but they still need kind of my finance help and contracting help as well, or maybe another department. We work with the OBGYN department a lot, kind of outside of OCRST, where they may need some finance or contracting help. So if it's that kind of a hybrid collaboration agreement you're talking about, then it's totally collaborative. So pretty much communication, determining what they need from me, from my standpoint of whether they need contracting help, whether they need budgeting help. So it's a very collaborative thing between all those departments for the hybrid. collaboration agreements. If we're talking about some subcontracting, it really depends. Again, if it's outside of OCRST, I can certainly help with subcontracting. It can go from all the way from, I just need your guidance on this. Where do I go to initially submit something, or how would I go about doing this? So it can go from just guidance that way all the way to, I need your services. Can you please submit this subcontract for me? So it totally depends on the department and what they need. So very collaborative, just a lot of communication with the other departments to find out what they need.
Thanks, Denise. And Brooke, I see you maybe put a little bit more information in the chat. So we might want to sort of connect you and Denise sort of offline, and maybe we can sort of help provide some guidance specifically to your question about industry partners and PI sponsors. We have a lot of studies that are industry funded, but where the PI is the sponsor, and those agreements look very much like a clinical trial agreement. The payment schedule is often different, or the payment terms, but the terms and feel very much like what you're used to in a clinical trial agreement. The next question I'm going to direct to Tiffany. How do you determine what trials go to the IIO, which is the new IND IDE office under the Office of Regulatory Compliance, and which are managed with OCRST?
Hi, thanks. Yes, so the IIO and OCRST regulatory together form the IND IDE program for CU and shoots. So there's a couple different criteria that we use to determine whether this would be a project that would be taken on by the IIO or by our office. And that is primarily the indication and the population. So most cancer studies are going to come to us. However, if there is, like Dr. Wilky was talking about, a manufacturing component that's being done on campus, or for some of these CAR T cells, that some of those manufacturing type studies that are still oncology related will go to the IIO. An easy way to find out is to visit the IIO's webpage and complete their intake triage form. Once you complete that form, and I'll put this in the chat momentarily, that will kind of kick to the correct person based on the responses in that form.
Thanks, Tiffany. The next question, I'm going to go back to Stephanie because it's around monitoring and QA. And it's, how do you build in monitoring QA? And is it acceptable for the PI to delegate writing of the protocol to someone else? How do you ensure protocols are detailed and clear?
Sure.
You might want to take the first part and then
I was just going to say, I'll take the first part. I think Tessa could probably answer the second and third part. So what's nice for us, the OCRST team has set up a really wonderful protocol template that the investigators can kind of just click in and fill out. So our monitoring language is already included in the template. So it's a huge, huge lifesaver. But from that, once we get a completed protocol, that's when we'll build our monitoring plans and what we look like, what we'll look at, and what we'll QA through the life cycle of the study. So the start is having a wonderful template that's already been created. And then, like I said, our monitoring plans are tailored to each study. So it's kind of hard to say, like, this is a generic of what we do, because we really look at each study and what we're looking at. But our primary focus is always going to be the critical data endpoints of the study. That's what we're going to pay the closest attention to. So that's quick synopsis on that.
Well, and I'd say to add to that, for the delegating the writing of the protocol, the template does, again, like Stephanie said, have quite a bit of the language that the PI will need. I think it's not uncommon that we have fellows work with some of our investigators and PIs to kind of write the protocols. However, I think it's very important that the PI is still very engaged in the protocol writing, since they will be the one following the protocol and running it. But I think that we also, even our team collaborates on the writing of the protocol as well. So I think, in a sense, the PI really needs to be at the base of the protocol writing. And then I think that, each individual with their expertise can kind of give advice on how to fill in some of the language for some of those respective sections. And then for the question about ensuring protocols are detailed and clear, I think that's essentially what our team is for. I think we really do multiple rounds of protocol review to really make sure that each section of the protocol is consistent. And also, a lot of us have a good understanding of how things are run in the clinic space too, to make sure that it seems feasible to be carried out the way it's written as well. So anyone else can feel free to add to. But.
Yeah, I would add to that we both have like project managers, regulatory, and monitors who look at the protocol to make sure it makes sense. So there's multiple people looking at it to make sure it's clear, so we all understand.
Thank you both. I think Tiffany or Tessa described the overview of the process pretty well, from when we receive a protocol to when sort of how it moves through the life cycle. That information is also on our website, but there is a specific question built in here, maybe for Tiffany. What is the volume of studies per regulatory coordinator?
So I have a homemade acuity tool that I've developed to determine what the workloads would be. And that takes into account various factors, and including where the study is, whether it's in startup or maintenance. So the answer is, I'm going to give you a lovely FDA answer. It depends. It depends how many studies they have and what status they're in. But I do monitor them so that each RAC's workload is approximately the same based on their job title and experience. So
I think to give you a sense of volume, for the number of trials we're managing at any one time, it's usually around 50. And that includes trials that are in development, actively accruing, or in follow-up, and those sort of in more closeout. So, that's sort of our collective team of, I think it's 17 FTEs manage a pretty big workload, and that involves sort of that multi-center coordination as well as the FDA sort of management, financials, the whole bit. So quite a high volume that this team does. I would say per coordinator, it might be a little bit less than in an industry sponsored space because the roles are quite different, right? And there's a lot more responsibility that goes with it. We have a couple of questions that are kind of like, how do I get started? How do I find more resources? So I'm going to kind of open this up to all the panels. We do have, a good place to start is going to our website and sort of, or sending us an email inquiry about your particular project. We do have, we work exclusively with COMERB as our IRB of record for studies that we submit. However, I guess there is a potential that an external IRB couldn't be involved, but really we rely fully on COMERB for IITs generated from our investigators at our center. We talked about sort of IND office versus OCRST a little bit. That determination is made on a number of factors, but all studies that require an IND will be managed by one of those offices, usually determined through that intake process that Tiffany talked about. And then we talked about contracting and how that works. And then for a new investigator, one of the questions we have is how do I get more information or more resources if I'm new to this space? We have a couple of resources, and I'll let panel talk to. We have an education team that really provides a training plan for all new investigators that come into the cancer center. We have multiple trainings that are available through CU. A lot of trainings that are available under an umbrella of classes called the Responsible Conduct of Research that many investigators are required to take. Those are all on Skillsoft. We also can give access and can promote the use of an NIH online course for investigators that really are acting maybe as a PI for the first time. It's a really good course that's self-paced, that I think has multiple modules. It covers a lot of the sort of sponsor investigator responsibilities. And then we also, throughout the Cancer Center, employ a mentorship model. So if it's a junior faculty, they can be paired with a more senior faculty member to help guide them. We do that a lot, obviously, with fellowship scenarios, but also just for junior faculty that maybe are newer to that space. So, hopefully those answer the questions, but I'll give the panel a minute or two to maybe add in anything else they would like to.
Yeah, I would just add, to plug again the incubator meeting. So we're in the process of redoing the incubator. Before it was sort of like one more thing you had to check off the list, but we really want this to be like a translational research think tank type of approach. So starting next month or in the new year, we're basically going to try to get representatives from across different cancer center programs. So basic scientists, translational scientists, clinical folks. So I think the one message I want to get across again, and I sound like a broken record, I'm sure, is it's never too early to talk about your concept that you're mulling. Even if you're like, well, I have to apply for a grant first. Like that advice, and it could be just some random person who you never would have thought had interest or a potential collaboration for somebody that has a particular mouse model. And it's like, oh, well, I can do, I've done this, this, and this in the lab. Like that can really help to expedite and refine your concept idea. So it's never too early to get that out there and to kind of share what you're thinking and get that early feedback. The time to not come to the IIT committee is when you've already independently written the grant, negotiated with the pharma company, figured out like how much money they're going to give you, and you've drafted the protocol and you're like, we need to open within a month, otherwise the company's going to yank my money. Like that is not the time. Like the more notice that you can give the entire team, the more helpful we're going to be for you, the more we can help prevent the endless sleepless nights and pulling your hair out while you're trying to get a study off the ground. Like it doesn't mean you have to have all the answers. Like we are used to people coming and not having all the answers figured out. But we can help you, just avoid the potholes and try to make the process faster and more efficient.
Well, thank you again to all our panelists. Thank you for the questions that you guys all gave ahead of the meeting and those in the chat. I'll turn it back over to Victoria for the wrap up.